Hello students. Today I am going to talk about a great Indo-Anglian poet, R. Partasarathi, and his poem The Homecoming. In the earlier poem, yesterday I talked about Sayyid Imamuddin and his poem Don't Call Me Indo-Anglian. So that was against identity politics, and this poem is for it. R. Partasarathi is a famous Indian English poet. He hails from the southern parts of India. Raja Gopal Partasarathi is a bilingual poet who wrote in two languages, Tamil language and English language. His magnum opus, Rough Passage, took him 15 years, that is from 1961 to 1975 to complete. The essence of the poem is definitely the influences of the two different cultures on the life of the poet speaker. Mr. Partasarathi is the poet speaker in this poem. The poem is painted in the clash between two different cultures, English culture and Indian culture, or you may call it Tamil culture. The poem is written in two parts, or rather three parts. Exile examines the consequences of British rule on Indians' identity and the need to go back to the roots. The second part, the trial, celebrates love as a reality. And the third part, homecoming, explores the phenomenon of one's returning to one's homeland or to roots. It is clear that the three divisions, exile, trial and homecoming, are to be read as one long poem, which is entitled as Rough Passage, symbolizing the poet's rough passage, rough journey in England and a rough home back to India, where he faced the problem of cultural re-entry, because he came from outside and he could not fit himself into the Indian environment also. So he was like a misfit. Exile, the first part, depicts the kind of life the poet had to lead among the alien people in alien land, that is in England. As the title Homecoming announces or suggests, R. Partasarathi comes home after spending some time abroad, but he is not able to fit himself in the current scenario culturally, linguistically, sociologically and psychologically. The poem builds on the idea of the poet feeling exiled and isolated in spite of familiar things that surround him in India. R. Partasarathi is one among those who molded the shape of a contemporary Indo-Anglian poetry and gave it a special identity, miraculous identity and recognition. Partasarathi is connected in the poem with the problems arising from the use of English language and his aspirations to become an English poet. It is an intelligent and profoundly moving expression of a poet trying to come to terms with himself. It is the longest autobiographical poem in Indo-Anglian literature. This is an autobiographical poem where he narrates his experiences in a different country and in his own country. The poem conveys the poet's poetic personality. In these poems, he makes an attempt to resolve the tension in his mind against the conflict between Indian and European culture, which is the vital force behind the poet's, Mr. Partasarathi's poetry, and his blind inclination towards foreign languages, which altered him alienated him from Tamil culture. He was very fond of English literature and English culture, and he went there, but he was alienated from his own culture. As a result, he has sensed a loss of his own identity. The persona opens the poem by sharing his linguistic instability or inability. He accepts that his tongue has been tied by English, and he is not fluent with Tamil as he was abroad for a very long time. He expects people to speak, when he comes back, he expects people to speak good Tamil, as has been used in good old times, when Tamil literature and scriptures flourished. His expectations are thwarted. They are in vain, and his hopes vanish when he hears people use Tamil that is articulated by the characters in celluloid world of cinema. The people speak a different kind of language now. The agony of homecoming to the language and its culture is excruciating for the poet. The language and the culture both are debased. People, even in Hindi mainland, we see people speaking Mumbaiya kind of Hindi, which hurts the poet. And he doesn't come to terms with them in order to realize himself as a person and a poet. In section 12 of the poem, Homecoming, from Rough Passage, the poet talks of himself in the most objective manner when he asserts, "I see him now sitting at his desk." So this he is the poet himself. Rough Passage is ultimately a document of self-assessment of a highly sensitive poet who is haunted by the feelings of cultural alienation and rootlessness. He comes from England, from a different country, to his own homeland, and he finds that he cannot fit in his own homeland. He is fully conscious of the transitoriness of human life. So he is disappointed in India. He claims that he made the mistake of opting for the wrong gods from the start. He wanted to become a good poet, but he failed, and then he became a critic. So he says that I went for wrong gods in the beginning for inspiration. His course of action was erroneous right from the beginning. It began with his experiments with the English language. It started when he set off to England for English education. Another major obstacle to his career was his having got married. he is not happy now. He thinks that marrying has, spoiled his career, poetic career. He states that he should have paid heed to the classical poets. It was better to marry a woman than marry her. So he is not satisfied with his married life. He wanted to pursue higher things. Now, as he has failed in his areas of interest, namely poetry, he teaches. Now he has started teaching. He has become a critic. He teaches probably as he had learned from experience that poetry cannot provide him the source of livelihood. He has become critic and he does not like this kind of profession. He now tries to prove his mettle by reviewing works written by others, and he feels that he is not doing a good work. In other words, circumstances had made him a critic. This label of being a critic had endowed him with invitations to conferences. He visited various places. He had taken this profession, taken him quite some time to realize that he had no talent, and wondered how words flowed so easily. He substantiates this by claiming one can be articulate about nothing. He is telling about the profession of critics. Articulate as an adjective signifies spoken so as to be intelligible, and also means expressed in articles or in separate items or particulars. The poet means to say that a person can endeavor, try to sound intelligible about anything or about nothing. Sound and fury signifying nothing. And one can compartmentalize certain subjects so as to sound like a scholar. Perhaps in this regard, the role of the critic suited him better.